And welcome back to the show. Housing has been a challenge in New York, especially with the pandemic underscoring the importance of affordable housing. United for Housing is a coalition of more than 80 organizations that's producing a blueprint for housing investment for the new mayor, I should say, Eric Adams of New York City. The coalition's comprehensive set of recommendations is designed to shape housing policies for the next decade. Joining me now to share a little bit more is the Director of Policy and Communications at the New York Housing Conference, Daren Jaime. Then we're also pleased to be joined by the Executive Director at MBD Community Housing Corporation, Derrick Lovett. And gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. And I'll start off first with you, Brendan, as we talk about a new mayoral administration. Really, housing is of the utmost importance for many New Yorkers. And I know, as I said in the intro, that you're trying to give a blueprint to the new mayor and which way to go.
Yes, so we, formed these recommendations starting back in September 2019, and then released them a year ago, and then worked with all of the candidates last year, sort of sharing our recommendations, our detailed recommendations. And then our main recommendation that we really wanted candidates to weigh in on was the need to double housing investment in the city. So we called for $4 billion of housing capital spending every year going forward, $2.5 billion for affordable housing development, and then $1.5 billion for public housing for NYCHA. And so at the time, all the leading candidates agreed to that, including Mayor Eric Adams. Unfortunately, he released his first budget and it did not have the increased housing resources. So we're going to be pushing with the city council and pushing on his administration to honor that commitment and really expand housing resources.
Mm-hmm. Derrick, as you look at the housing crisis right here in New York City, how would you describe it and what do you see?
Well, I will not use the word catastrophic, but unfortunately, it's twofold. One, you have a lack of affordable housing, and then you also have affordable housing that are in deplorable conditions. So we have to take the deplorable conditions, correct those, as well as bring on additional affordable housing. And doing those on two fronts in tandem is key. One other thing I wanted to say, I know that we need to do a deeper dive to deeper affordability, but there are also people that are making a decent living that still can't afford to live here. I've heard the former borough president, Reverend Diaz Jr. once said that his son had to actually move out of the Bronx because either he was overqualified for affordable housing and couldn't afford the market rate. So we have to do a blended mix.
Yeah. When we look right now, we know the eviction moratorium is up in New York State. We're anticipating that there may be many people who still end up, well, I'd not say still, but will end up being on the homeless side of things. And we already have an emerging homeless population already. I know that you guys have talked about policies and trying to deal with the homeless and housing. Share with our viewers a little bit about how you see this and what you'd like to see happen in this area.
Sure. Derrick, if it's okay, I'll go first. We started our plan looking sort of long-term at what we needed to do to address the crisis. And then in the meantime, we had the COVID pandemic, which created additional housing need. And so the federal government provided some resources to try and prevent evictions, to help people pay their rent when they couldn't afford it. It's not been enough. And so the city and the state are going to need to find other resources to help the families, the households that still owe back rent, even with the federal support. And so that, like state rental assistance, city programs that would help people stay housed as well. There's going to be a need to have a lot of resources to prevent people from being evicted.
Yeah.
I would say that's spot on. But another thing that we have to take a look at is jobs. We talk about affordable housing and how are they built? They're constructed, and we need the Black and brown people that live in these communities to also be a party to some of these jobs. HBD and NYCHA are very adamant about, if you're going to take loans or work on our properties, you must hire from the local community. We've been working with a group called Urban Strategies, run by LaShawn Henry, that's been doing a great job for us, assisting us with getting these workers, connecting them with the contractors, and ensuring that these folks are being placed.
Yeah. Well, we know that when we talk about New York City and we look at the things that go on, particularly in the area of housing, racism and classism are huge. And I know that you guys have also tried to work on a strategy to deal with racial equity and to deal with that. when it comes to housing. Share with our viewers a little bit more about the vision that you see in terms of impacting along racial lines.
Yeah, when we came together as a coalition, there were some principles that we came up with to guide our work, and one of them was to address the long-term racial disparities, the racial discrimination that long existed in housing. And so, we looked at things that would help address that. One of the things we're pushing for is an increase in home ownership in the city, affordable home ownership in the city, and doing that in a way that tries to reverse the long home ownership gap that exists by race in the city. And so trying to give that opportunity for wealth building to Black and Latinx New Yorkers that has long existed for white New Yorkers. And also looking at other forms of cooperative ownership and things like that. And, really expanding legal assistance to protect tenants and protect homeowners. So we're really looking for ways that we can be conscious of that long history. And then one other thing is really trying to push on all neighborhoods to be a part of the housing plan. And so I think for a long time, a lot of the affordable housing was built in neighborhoods that were predominantly Black New Yorkers and Latinx New Yorkers, and really pushing for neighborhoods that are predominantly white, neighborhoods that are wealthier, that have often avoided building affordable housing, and really pushing for them to be a part of the solution as well.
Yeah, Derrick, when we talk about affordable housing in New York, we say that there's not enough being built. They're saying that, we see buildings going up, and we see a lot of development going across the city from all 5 of the boroughs. But when we look around, we can see the people who really need it are sometimes finding themselves being priced out. And so how do we expand, and how do we get this affordable housing situation in a more better light?
Well, I think I do want to quickly address one thing about what was just said. In Black and brown communities, we are treated unjustly. And I think in other communities they're not. I think that in our communities, we must exercise the vote, not only vote when there's a presidency, but the local elections, to hold your local elected officials accountable for giving you the services that you need. Moving on to your question, this is a supply and demand issue. There's quite a bit of housing that needs to be built. It needs to be done to a deeper level of affordability. But now, when you go deeper to affordability, there's less income coming in. So you have to have some type of a mixed income in order to go deeper. And you go deeper one, and you have to go higher the other. At the end of the day, you still have to operate these buildings. Unfortunately, you can't operate them if you're not collecting the rents.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? I mean, I know you guys got boots on the ground. Where do we go from here, given the fact that we're in the first quarter of a new year, new mayoral administration? Where do we go from here?
I think one thing you have to do is look at your stock. What are you building? How can you build something that can afford to carry itself, be a bit more sustainable? For example, MBD with Trinity Financial and Monadnock as the general contractor, we're building the largest passive housing building in North America, 425 Grand Concourse. That will have a 50% reduction in utility costs. Having the reduction in utility costs will allow you to have lower rents. So we have to figure out how can we be sustainable and carrying the buildings, and also with the rents we charge, which allow us to then go to a deeper affordability.
And I think it's really, working, pressuring the new mayor, pressuring the relatively new governor to really deliver the resources so that groups like Derrick can do the work and can build the housing, can preserve the housing, showing that we really need to expand funding if we're going to address this crisis.
If I can say this, and I'm sorry,
yeah, go ahead, Derrick.
A lot of times, and this is one thing, a lot of groups with pandemic, they've been, talking, the residents on one side, the landlord on the other, and it's been an us against them. And one thing that we have to understand, it's not us against them. We're in this together. We're in this together. We need to find solutions together. We need to work together at all levels.
So when we talk about NYCHA, I know that's a huge issue. People are still talking about NYCHA all across the city, the work that needs to go on there. We could do a whole show, and neither of us have time to really be able to address the issues with NYCHA. But when we look and see what's happening right now, what are some of the immediate things that we can talk about on the platform that can be addressed with?
Well, let me talk about what we did. MBD teamed up with L&M and Canberra. We have 772 units of the Baychester Murphy projects. And when you go there, and you look at them, you would think that you're in a high-end establishment. Um, Treating folks with dignity will help rise them up. And I think that NYCHA had to go public-private in order to bring more income in and more capacity in order to give the services to the tenants that they need and deserve.
Yeah, we were really hoping for a lot of federal funding from the Build Back Better legislation for NYCHA, for public housing. We all know NYCHA has $40 billion in repair needs. It looked like there was a chance of getting something close to that from the Build Back Better legislation. I think we're more pessimistic about that right now. And so I think we'll still push for that, but without that, what we need is a state and the city to step up. And so that's why we've called for the city to spend 1.5 billion per year for public housing, capital for public housing repairs, and calling on the state to match that. So that's $3 billion per year from the city and state. It doesn't get you to 40 billion, but it gets you along the way. And then you need these programs like Derrick's talking about. I think, you need the RAD, program or the blueprint or other ways to fill in that gap.
Yeah. What's been the response of elected officials and leaders? I know we talked about the mayor a little while ago, but when it comes to this issue of housing, what have you heard from elected leaders? How much of a priority? Everybody talks about it, and I can say talks about it, but how much of a priority do you deem it in the hearts and minds of those who are elected leaders?
So, at the state level, we saw a good housing, Governor Hochul put out a new 5-year housing plan. It's pretty good. I think, we're going to push for some more resources. We certainly want to see more resources for NYCHA in there. But I think it was a good commitment. And then on the city level, Mayor Adams has said housing's a priority. He agreed to our commitment to raise spending. But really, the where you see someone's priorities is in the budget. And in his first budget, it's not in there yet. And so, I believe that he understands it. And so, but we just want to see it in the budget.
Derrick, you talked a little bit about the work that you did with the NYCHA property and really giving people dignity and decency. And when we see the deterioration that's going on in NYCHA, it's been, it's been appalling sometimes. It's been disappointing. But if you had a forward vision as to how to deal, and I think you shared a little bit about that blueprint in which how can we better suit in areas like NYCHA where there is public housing, it's not going away, and we just want to be able to see it become sustainable and at the same time, as you say, also beautiful for those who actually live there.
I think we need to look at best practices. I don't think we need to look at recreating the wheel. I think we need to, as Brandon said, bring in additional funding, and let's go with what works. There's public RAD, which allows more funds to come in and do the rehab. Status quo and putting a head in the sand is not going to do it. I think this is a new invention. I spoke to a lot of the folks that have come out and seen what was done. They like it. I think we should move forward. We just need more funding.
Let me talk about the issue of home ownership because that's huge. I think that for many people, the American dream is always to just own a home. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. But I think what's wrong is sometimes people just don't have the money to be able to actually own a home. When you talk about New York, we've got some skyrocketing prices that I don't think that some people ever be able to tap into home ownership within their lifetime. But there are methods and ways that we can get more people into homes. So I want to get your take on home ownership in New York City and the work that you're doing to try to bring that about for people.
Our report was long and comprehensive. We looked at affordable housing from a lot of different angles. And one of the things we did focus on was home ownership. And the way to increase affordable home ownership is to both increase the supply of affordable home ownership. So making sure that is something that HPD is building home ownership units, or finding other ways to sort of expand that supply so there's more supply for people to get into and supply that is affordable, that is subsidized. And then also increasing the subsidies, the down payment assistance that helps people access that as well. And so if you're increasing the supply and you're increasing the subsidies and support for people to buy, you're increasing those opportunities. And then also looking at other models where people can buy or collectively buy affordable co-ops, things like that can help tenants become owners.
Yeah.
I don't have much more to add to that. I think that's pretty much spot on. I think that from like when the GIs were coming back from the war, a lot of the that was all from government financing, and they found out a way to keep blacks out of it, right? If you were a domestic worker, then you couldn't get the loan, and most blacks were domestic workers. They found a way of redlining us, and I think that we've found that in many ways in our communities that we're always kept out of wealth building opportunities. I think homeownership is exactly that. It will take deep subsidies in order to build something. There's a cost to it. Who's going to offset the cost? It's usually subsidies. And that subsidy, whether it's evaporated over a 20, 25-year period where it used to be, or there's a limit on the what you can flip it for, to keep it affordable, is yet to be seen. I know that HPD is working on their open door program, which is the for sale program. I think they sharpen their pencils on the developer side. I think they need to sharpen it again on what will mean for the end users, the home buyers, and see if there can be a win-win there.
Yeah. Going forward in 2022, obviously optimistic about the budget. We know that you said that at the top, Brenda, that some things were left out of the city budget. And now the quest is to talk to lawmakers to try to see about how we can increase, funding going towards housing going forward. What can we anticipate going throughout this 2022 year? Because, we're trying to come out of this pandemic as best as we possibly can, but yet and still a lot of, it's a lot of delays and a lot of things. Do you foresee some quick action on some things, or do you think that this is going to be a longer battle here?
It's hard to know for sure. Mayor Adams committed to this on the campaign trail. Now that he's got his housing team pretty much assembled, I think we are hopeful that the housing team will start to work on a new housing plans, that Adams can show us his vision, and that with that housing plan is a plan to increase resources. But we're not going to just wait for it. We're going to be really pushing and advocating to make sure that is the case. I think we're making the case that it is a good investment to increase spending even at this time, right? That like housing investment creates jobs. It's a stimulus in a way that the city doesn't have as many ways to create stimulus like this. And so it is a good investment in addition to being a thing that is desperately needed right now.
Yeah. And as we look towards the future, obviously we know that the housing crisis is going to be a major thing to talk about in New York City across. We talked about the Build Back Better program. I know we said a little bit more pessimistic about that, but can you just share from your perspective, if this doesn't go across the finish line, and we know where things stand right now, if it doesn't make it across the finish line, how much are New Yorkers really affected by this not going across the finish line?
There were so many good things in that legislation that would have really helped New Yorkers. We just have this long-standing housing crisis where people are housing unstable, people are becoming homeless, having trouble leaving homelessness. And there was funding for repairs at public housing. There was funding for a really big increase, not as much as we needed, but a really big increase in rental assistance that could have helped people be stable, have stable housing, to pay 30% of their income in rent, and to have extra money now to pay for other necessities. And there was more funding to build affordable housing. And so without that, what we have is more of the status quo, more of this longstanding housing crisis that hopefully the city and state can help deal with. There's another chance if Build Back Better doesn't pass. There's talk of adding some of those resources in the budget. I don't think would be as big as we're seeing in Build Back Better by any stretch, but any additional housing resources will help. But without it, it's status quo, which is, I think, intolerable.
Yeah. Derrick, I know you're doing a lot of work. For people who don't know about your company, please share with us about your company and the work that you do.
Absolutely. I work for MBD Community Housing Corp. The name was originally Mid-Bronx Desperados. They thought it was a gang and would not let them legally. So MBD Community Housing Corp, and from 1974, and I stand on the shoulders of heroes and sheroes. And basically what we're doing is moving things forward. I think the most important thing, other than bringing in the quantity of housing, is making sure we bring in the quality of housing. By bringing in the quality of housing and raising the bar, gives people the ability to live, wake up in the morning and feel like they're part of a wonderful, beautiful community. I said one thing to my porters and supers. I said, you go to Park Avenue in Manhattan, you look at the floors, they shine, the metal glistens. I said, you have the same skill sets, you work the same time, you have the same tools. When we reposition these buildings, they should look like you can put them on Park Avenue, they should look like they belong there, and they do. 32BJ is the union for our maintenance staff. We have a great relationship with them. There's something called the Thomas Shoreman Fund, which is an amazing training. And all of my supers and porters take training. What we've done is you can't put millions of dollars into the brick and mortars and not invest in your human capitals. And some of the men and women can't afford to go at night because they have families. So what we did is we gave a half a day to the supers and a half day a week to the porters to send them to this training so that they can benefit from the wonderful training that 32BJ offers.
Amazing work that goes on. Amazing work that goes on there. Transformative too. When we look at the space and the thing that you're doing there, I see Brandon shaking his head. But talk to us a little bit about you guys working together and how you guys have worked in tandem.
Sure. So, what we wanted to do was bring together, more than 80 organizations and find out what we could agree on to address the housing crisis. And, the New York Housing Conference is a small shop. We've got 5 staff right now. We put out policy papers and things like that. We rely on groups like Derrick's to help us understand the situation on the ground. And then also we try our best to support them as they're doing the work. So like they're telling us how they think we should be influencing policy. And then we're hoping that our policy work is supporting their work.
And, Daren, I'm a recovering banker. I out of the Marine Corps, I started off as a bank teller, wound up as a vice president on Wall Street, underwriting construction loans. So sitting in this seat, having the knowledge of how the finances go and now how the development goes, it's able for me to bring a unique skill set to this community. And it's our issues in the Bronx and Queens and Brooklyn, it's not unique. It's very similar. And so having a group like, to work with Brandon helps us pull things together and kind of move issues forward.
Yeah. The policy, working together works, right? And I think there's so many organizations out there that really want to see better for not just their organization, but for the city. And to put together a collaborative effort, to have more than 80 organizations really be able to deal with some of these major issues that so many New Yorkers are actually facing. We can always talk about the housing crisis in New York because we've got affordable housing, we've got homelessness, we've got people just trying to seek the path to home ownership. These are all things that consistently New Yorkers have had to deal with, but at the same time, trying to find ways and organizations to help them to be able to overcome. And so before we go, just share about that, just being able to impact people through the work that you do, because the work that you do, Derrick, has helped people have a better way of life. Brandon, it changes the quality of life. And so just share about, your feelings on the impact and your involvement.
I was sitting at a local eatery and somebody grabbed me from behind and started kissing me all over my head. And it was one of my seniors. And she said, I love you, I love you, I love you. And it brought a tear to my eye. When you can affect people that way, nothing else needs to be said.
All right,
yeah. And I think on our end, it's just, I think we're so high up from a policy standpoint that working with groups like Derrick to see the work they're doing on the ground is huge. I think there's times when it feels disappointing when something like Build Back Better almost passes and then doesn't. But knowing that maybe the big victory didn't happen yet, we've got a lot of small victories, and really, you put your head down, you do the work, and you hope to see some small changes, and you do see some small changes, and that feels pretty good.
So if people want more information about your organization before we go, tell them how they can get connected.
Sure. So you can find information about us on the web. We're the New York Housing Conference. So you can Google us or find us at our website, which is www.thenyhc.org. You can learn more about United for Housing at www.housing.thenyhc.org. And you can learn about us and reach out and find out ways you can be helpful, or find us on social media.
All right, Derrick, you get the last word.
Absolutely. You can find us at mbdhousing.org, mbdhousing.org. And it's a pleasure to be here, and looking forward to continue this amazing work that we're doing together.
All All righty. Derrick, Brendan, great having you guys both on the show. Want to thank you so much for joining us and being here with us on the Social Justice Forums. Thank you much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us.